you can do that.
Oh, I think
Whichever
Wanda's
makes you
going
more
to be
comfortable.
far better at doing that than I am.
Am
I
I?
have
All
a
right.
list of names in front of me. I'd have to go down and ask who's already present that I know is present based on their name or their image.
All right, you guys are all set. So Chris, if you could just make me co-host again, because I may have to bump off and then I want to be able to hop back on.
All right. Okay, so we are live on YouTube right now.
Very good.
Wanda, did you hit record?
I'm going to do that right now. Thank you.
And yeah, Chris, just make me co-host.
Just did
We're
that.
good. Okay, perfect.
Are we ready?
Sorry.
Let me know. No worries.
Yes, it's 9 o'clock. So I'm going to admit someone.
Okay.
Quick. All right. So I just want to let everybody know before the meeting starts, let the board members know that the meeting will be streamed live on YouTube. Please keep yourself muted until speaking, and we hope you will keep your cameras on. When speaking, unmute and please introduce yourself before your comments or questions for the audience or for the record. Dr. Sifu is coming into the meeting. All right, and we will do roll call. So when I call your name, please say present.
Hey, Wanda, I just want to let you know that I was able to get on at 9. I apologize for jumping in. It's Dave.
So that's perfectly fine.
No, Dave, we really appreciate you doing this, particularly this, David. It's very grateful that you could be.
I'm there for you, buddy. I'm there for you.
I understand you're in 4 places at one time.
Yeah, it's all right. It's all right.
I asked.
I'm on medications for that. I'm on medications for it.
There was supposed to be background music when you joined us, but unfortunately, you came a little more prematurely than anticipated.
My bad.
So you got it, my friend.
All right. Wanda, I will actually pass it back to you to do the roll call.
Okay, sounds great. Dr. David Reed,
Present.
Rennie Delaney,
Present.
David Sifu,
Here on many levels.
Commissioner Hayfield,
I am here.
Patrick Sandus,
Present.
Heather Board. She can't make it today. Scott Dickens. He's going to be late joining us. Chris, do I need to do guest as well?
Yes, yes, please.
Chris Miller,
Present.
Donna Cantrell,
Present.
Marsha Dubois,
Present.
I see Dr. Gitchell has joined us. George Gitchell.
He's here. I saw the hand.
Okay, yeah, I see him.
Sorry about that. Small technical difficulties on this side.
Carolyn Turner,
Present.
I believe that's everyone. So we're ready to begin, Dr. Sifu.
Thank you, Wanda. And we're going to stick with the agenda for the most part. Right after the welcome introductions, we are going to just take a moment to reflect on one of our brethren that we've lost in the last several days. So just bear with the slight fluctuation. First, I guess we're going to look for, I imagine that we do have a quorum, Wanda and Chris, so we're okay to proceed? Okay. All right. We're going to then look at a motion for approval of the December 4th, 2020 meeting minutes. I hope folks have seen those in advance. I know that Dave Reed has poured over them as he does, as he's wont to do.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
right.
They're good.
Are there any comments, questions, or additions to it? If not, we'll move for, there's a motion for approval. All opposed, say aye. All in favor, say aye.
Dr. Seafu,
Yes, Chris.
it's Chris, and you know I'm going to be here to make sure we do everything correctly.
Yes, what did we do wrong?
You do have to since you did have a motion and a second, you do have to do a roll call vote.
Oh, we do. Okay, all right, got it.
And
We'll
then,
do it.
okay, thank you.
I got it. All right, so forget about the last part. Wanda, would you just go through the voting members and then we'll take a roll call if you don't mind. And Wanda, you are on mute. So just go through the voting members and they'll say yay or nay.
Okay, Rennie Delaney,
Yay.
David Seafu,
Yay.
David Reed,
Yay.
Commissioner Hayfield,
Yay.
Patrick Sandus.
Yay.
Okay, that should be everyone.
Thank you. It moves in. It is passed unanimously. Appreciate that, Chris. Now we'll transition to the adoption of today or March 12th, 2021 meeting agenda. You see it.
Dr. Seafu,
Oh my
if
God.
I
Yeah.
might.
What did I do?
No, I want to make it easier on you.
Oh,
If you
okay.
want to ask if there are no changes to the agenda, and then we can just approve by
Okay.
consent.
Okay. I'll ask if there are any changes to the agenda, to today's agenda. Hearing none, we're going to go by a consent agreement that we're going to adopt it. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. So we are adopting the agenda. But before we get to the public comment, I think it would be appropriate, if it's okay, to just spend a moment either in silence or reflecting on Jim Rothrock, who was, there we go, there's Jim, who was our beloved lead for DARS and whatever it was called before that for years and years. Great friend of the to everyone, but particularly to those who have disabilities and their families, and just supporting it across the Commonwealth. You know, obviously Jim had a specific vested interest because he had been in a chair for a long time, but he was way bigger than that, and just truly somebody that made a difference. And you know, I got to work with Jim in so many different ways at the university, through this committee, in some different public events. So it's just a joy to spend time with him, and he'd want us to remember him with joy and with love, and I think we do that. So before we stop for a moment to reflect, I'll see if other folks on the call would like to just give some of their remembrances or some words for Jim.
Well, I'll say something quickly.
Yeah,
I remember the very first CNI meeting I attended. I said some things that normally you would not say in a meeting, as I was shocked to know the number of people who were paying into the fund, that it made me very frightened to drive on the roads. And I even requested of Jim that he get a helicopter and fly me from Charlottesville to Richmond. And at the end of the meeting, I was driving home and I called my wife and she said, "How'd the meeting go?" And I said, "I have a feeling I'll be kicked off of this board." She said, why would you say that? I said, "Well, I said a few choice words in the meeting that were just not very appropriate." The following day, I get a call from Kirsty Chamberlain, and I'm almost certain I'm going to be kicked off of this committee. She says, "I met with the commissioner after the meeting." I said, "Yeah, I had a feeling this was coming." And she said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, I don't know. I didn't think that meeting went well." She says, "Oh, I'm not sure about that. The commissioner wanted to know if you'd like to chair the committee." And so that's how I got that for 8 years. I'm not sure what Seafu did to get it, but that's what I did. And I will always remember Jim's infectious smile. That man had a smile, and you could see it from these pictures, always very welcoming, very warm, very kind, and obviously a steadfast supporter of the CNI from its inception. And I know we're all going to miss him greatly.
Well said, Dave. Appreciate that. Anybody else? Patrick?
I have a quick sort of note. It's been about 10 years since my more or less to the date since my accident, and through the rehab I spent time in different places, but I also spent time in the Woodrow Wilson Rehab Center, And that's what I remembered Jim coming to meet us there, and not like to check out the center, but he was sort of a presence, and his smile here and the pictures kind of remind me. That's sort of what I remember. So when I was basically rehabbing, I remember meeting him.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you.
This is Kathy.
Oh, hey, Kat.
As you can imagine, our agency and so many people across the Commonwealth are mourning the loss of Jim so early in his life and celebrating who he's been. And as you all have just said, Jim never met a stranger. That smile is infectious, was infectious, and his legacy is in all of us with that smile. And he did love the CNI, and he did much for brain injury services as well as spinal cord injury services. So I'm very proud to follow him, and knew that they were that his support has been here for the agency. And even a couple days, just a couple days ago, when he learned of his illness, he called me and talked about it, and he was so very positive, which was Jim. And that night I was on a Zoom call with friends. I looked down at my texts, and he was sending me information about what was going on at the General Assembly, what came out in the budget. And he said, "Oh, I see you got some money, blah, blah, blah." And I just thought, oh my goodness, he's just telling me this news, but he's still following what's happening at the General Assembly.
Yep.
He's an amazing man. And I really am honored to have worked with him.
Thank you, Kathy. And I think that's a great summary of who he was. Someone who was just dedicated to his family, to the advocacy and lives of folks with disability, and obviously to his work. So let's just spend a couple of seconds just reflecting on Jim and what he stood for. Thank you, everyone. Wanda, if you'd get us back to the agenda, we'll do what Jim would want us to do, which is get back on track and do some work, right? That was just wonderful. So that was sort of a public comment, but we're actually still in the public comment section to see if there's any additional or other public comments, if there are any. We'll pause a moment.
There were none.
Okay, thank you. All right. Chris, you're going to let me know when I need to vote on things, of course. I'm watching your screen closely. All right. Next, we're going to get back to Wanda with our financial report.
All right, you'll see on your screen, Chris has put up the spreadsheet on the information I'm about to tell you. The revenue, this is just year to date now, July through January 2021, is $371,093.70. Interest received $12,753.01. Total revenue year to date, $383,846.71. Total expenditures year to date, including grants, administration, and DMV charges, $398,857.30. Total year to date balance is negative $15,010.59. Now this is just negative, but this is just from July 2020 to January 2021. So it's just year to date. Cash balance as of 7/1/2020 was $2,836,554. Year to date revenue minus expenditures leave a balance in the fund of $2,821,543.05. Revenue average is currently $53,014, which is an increase from 3 months ago of $1,750. I'll also let you guys know that the last 2 months in 2020, when we were in the midst of the pandemic, we were averaging around 28,000 over those 2 months. I'm pretty sure because of the DMV shutdown, but it has been steadily increasing starting in July. And I just got the report a couple days ago for February. I didn't have time to incorporate it into this sheet, but the revenue was a little over $60,000. So we're pretty much back on track to where we were. And that's it as far as the finances. Any questions?
Thank you, Wanda. We will make sure that Dave Reed gets his helicopter, because sadly the numbers are rising, and that means it's not the safest place, but it is. I guess it's good for our fund, so it's good to hear. Thank you. Are there any comments or questions on the financials?
Just to say, it was 120,000 when I first started, so that's why I really needed the helicopter.
Yeah. No. So appreciate it. All right. Good. And we'll obviously be coming back to this as we're talking about the next steps in terms of grants and whatever. So great. All right. So if we can go back to the agenda. I know that Dr. Gitchell's on, and I think he's going to be representing for Dr. Manning Frank and giving us an update on the CNI supported grant targeted transcranial magnetic stimulation for cognitive rehab after TBI. George, you are on mute, and I'm just warning you ahead of time. So Dr. Gitchell, to you.
Thank you, Dr. Sifu. I believe that Dr. Frank is going to be joining us. She had something else conflicting this morning, so she should be here within a few minutes, but we can go ahead and get started.
She's on her way in right now.
Oh,
okay. George, would you like to pause for a moment then?
Sure.
Yeah,
We'll let her come in and get situated.
Yeah, we're going to be ahead of schedule, so that's that. If folks are okay with it, I'd rather. There she is. There's Laura. Laura, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can hear you fine.
Good.
Good morning, everybody.
Right. We're just getting started, and I'll defer to whichever one of you is going to take us through the presentation.
Well, I'm going to start off. I think I had mentioned to Laura that I've always considered myself kind of the caretaker of this grant. It's really hers from start to finish. She wrote it, conceived it, and came up with all of it. I was just taking care of some of the nuts and bolts at the VA. So I'll go through the beginning of it for you. So next slide, please. I won't belabor a lot of the TBI background for you all. You know a lot of the history and implications of the injury across the board. But suffice it to say that injuries are on the increase. They are the signature word of the Middle East. And one of the most common and persistent issues among TBI are cognitive deficits. Next slide, please. So what we have found in the past is that severe TBI does affect EEG frequencies and reduce consciousness. And this is correlated with similar other cognitive diseases like Alzheimer's and different forms of dementia. And we believe that these shifts in EEG frequency come from disordered communication between large areas of cortical neurons in the brain. And Dr. Frank has previously shown this behavior in mild TBI patients in veterans. Next slide, please. The theory of repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation has been described pretty extensively in the literature. It has been shown repeatedly that high frequency TMS depolarizes neurons underneath the coil, and that RTMS stimulation at high frequency has shown to decrease delta wave activity among those neurons as well. Next slide, please. So the motivation behind this initial grant was that there really isn't any well-supported intervention for TBI subjects, aside from basically compensatory strategies and just teaching, as far as here's how you get around your deficits. There really hasn't been any intervention that's been identified that can reliably help cognitive deficits in TMS, in TBI. Next slide, please. So the relatively simple hypothesis that we found is that TBI and cognitive deficits are correlated with increased delta activity, and TMS has shown to reduce delta activity in patients with TBI. So the hypothesis is that the TMS stimulation will increase cortical excitability and thus improve intention and learning. Next slide, please. The specific aims were directly to determine objective measures of attention, learning, and cognitive control, and determine the effect of RTMS on those specific measures. Next slide. So now we've kind of gone through a lot of the background that you're well aware of. The TMS, complex, tremendously expensive machine. And it's based on a very, very simple principle that you all use every single day. This is the same principle that affects every electric motor or any type of power generation aside from solar. If you're getting wind power, coal, nuclear, whatever, it's all based on this law. And that's basically if you have a wire, an electrical wire or a coil of wire, and you move a magnet past that wire, the magnetic field induces a current in that wire. And the opposite is also true. If you pass current through that wire, it will induce a magnetic field. Next slide, please. So in the case of a TMS system, you can take a simple circle of wire and make a round magnetic field. If you make a figure of 8 of wire, it actually produces a focal point of a magnetic field. And you can focus that down to about 1 square millimeter. Next slide, please. So the combination of the TMS system, you can see being held on the patient's skull there is a large coil of 8 wire. It's about an 8-inch wide coil. And with the fairly complex camera system, you can navigate that coil directly over a 3D representation of the patient's MRI. And then you can move around and find exactly where the coil is stimulating through the skull. Next slide, please. So the TMS system is basically both sides of Lenz's law. A huge pulse of current from the TMS system on the order of 20,000 volts passes through this figure of 8 coil and thus creates a pulse of a magnetic field. That magnetic field passes through the skin and the skull painlessly, non-invasively. And if you can think about a neuron essentially like a little piece of wire. And once that magnetic field hits the neuron, it passes current through it and the neuron fires. Next slide, please. So what we're able to do with a TMS system is move that coil around the navigated MRI and pick out each individual little point. And the first step typically in this is what we call motor mapping. So we can take the little strip of the brain cortex that controls every skeletal muscle in the body, hook up EMG electrodes, and then pulse up and down that the gyrus to figure out exactly where those muscles fire. More importantly, the reason that we do this is that we use this to tune and figure out what is the least amount of current and therefore magnetism that we can use to stimulate the brain. And in that way, we can minimize the amount of energy being used and make the process safer. Next slide, please. So the basic study design is a double-blind, crossover, placebo-controlled with sham. Patients were, after informed consent, they were enrolled, had a baseline MRI, high-resolution MRI of their brain, and all of their baseline assessments. They went into either active or sham TMS for 1 full week, were assessed at the end of that week, washed out for 2, came back for the opposite, whether it was sham or active. Post-treatment assessment, and then a 2-week follow-up. So it was a relatively rigorous type of schedule, and that did lead to a few problems in the study activities. Next slide, please. The outcome measures, I'm going to let Laura explain a lot of these far better than I can. I'm an engineer, she's the neuropsychologist, so I'm not going to belabor any of these particularly. Next slide, please. So the intervention that we used during this TMS was high frequency stimulation over the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is right around here. And that is kind of thought of, or can be thought of at least, as somewhat of like the traffic cop of a lot of the cortex, where you have a lot of different brain areas, whether it's frontal, prefrontal, temporal, and this is kind of controls all of the signals coming out of those. And that was, the disorder of TBI is thought of as the disorder of neural communication. And there's a lot of evidence that shows the DLPFC controls where that traffic goes and how it moves. Each individual day was a 20-minute session, so they got 1,200 pulses per day out of that. It was a 2-second stimulation at 10 hertz, followed by 20 seconds off, 2 seconds on, 20 seconds off for 20 minutes. The very first day, they were stimulated at 80% of that resting motor threshold that we found through motor mapping. And then the 4 days after that were at 100% of resting motor threshold. And again, that was a safety parameter determined parameter. Historically, TMS has been thought of as it may or may not induce seizures in the literature, and that always has been a concern from the IRB. More recently, in FDA-controlled trials, we've come to find out that I think 3 seizures have been induced over 20 or 30 years of worldwide research. So a lot of those parameters are being relaxed now. And next slide, please. So we had 40 subjects that did sign informed consent, and 12 ended up withdrawing consent after that due to the extreme time commitment that was required for the study. We had two patients that also withdrew due to migraines. It's interesting that TMS, if you read the literature, is about half of the publications mention that it may induce headaches, and the other half of them say that it is a great treatment for migraines. So the jury's still out there. But we do have 26 completed subjects. And again, time was a major, major barrier. We were essentially looking for people that had TBI with significant cognitive deficits, and because of the time, pretty much had to be unemployed and willing to come to the hospital, 2 full weeks. And obviously with COVID, that became a much, much larger issue overall. Next slide, please. And I'll pass it off to Dr. Frank.
Okay, well, thank you so much, George. Hi, everybody. So I will just quickly recap the background and hypotheses, and then get right into what we found. Yes, thank you. So as George mentioned, we in previous research have observed that in MTBI populations, the resting prefrontal low frequency power is increased. And we've also replicated that in our ongoing observational study of MTBI. So we hypothesized, based on the literature, what's known about the correlates of increasing low frequency power in the resting state, that this was indicating that the MTBI cohorts had a hypofunction or decrease of function in arousal and attention networks. This comes from studies that have shown that as vigilance declines or even consciousness is reduced, there's an increase in resting EEG power frontally. So taking that alongside the extensive literature that has shown that in depression, rTMS can cause an improvement in objective measures of attention and learning. We thought that we should target these networks involved in attention and learning that may be hypofunctional in MTBI, and that this would be a helpful contribution to the literature, because the efficacy of rTMS for cognition in TBI is unknown. As I said, it's pretty well established for depression, but for another population for whom cognition is an issue in TBI, it's unknown. So next slide, please. Okay, as George mentioned, the design of the study was to apply an excitatory stimulation to the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex using a protocol that's very similar to the FDA-approved depression protocol. The participants in this study were selected for having subjective cognitive complaints. So we did not test them for any neuropsychological deficits before eligibility. It was only reporting a low level of subjective cognitive issues on a questionnaire. And we also used a crossover trial design, as George mentioned. So that means that every participant participates in both the control condition and the active condition. So we measured several neuropsychological tests that address attention, learning, memory, and executive function. These are standardized tests. We have a good idea of how normal and abnormal populations perform on these. We also measured subjective functioning using questionnaires that participants complete themselves. So as I mentioned above, cognitive complaints were addressed, post-concussive symptoms, depression, fatigue, self-efficacy, pain, anxieties, several measures like that addressed functioning. We measured resting state EEG, and we also measured EEG during the performance of a target detection task, which addresses attention and arousal. So the task was very long and very boring. So for most people, or the intention there, and it's also shown in previous literature, that as you perform this task, your vigilance declines as you get bored. So we were measuring the responsiveness of vigilance to our intervention. So what did we expect to see? We expected to see neuropsychological improvement. This was the main outcome. We expected to see subjective functioning symptoms improving. We expected to see a decrease in frontal resting EEG power. And we also expected to see, as I just mentioned, enhanced stimulus processing in the EEG during the target detection task, and also sustained vigilance in response to the active TMS condition. Next slide, please. So just very briefly, we analyzed the data using T-scores of the difference between the post measure and the pre-measure. And that was to test the effect of the active versus sham condition. And we also looked at performance over time. So that was to address how performance may have changed without regard to the condition of stimulation. So for example, if participants just got better at the task, we wanted to know that too. We did a similar analysis on the EEG power. And maybe I'll just briefly take this opportunity to define EEG power. So this is looking at how much energy is at different speeds of oscillation in the EEG. So I'm sure you've all seen an EEG, these squiggles that go up and down. That's comprised of several different oscillations at different speeds. So if there's a lot of slow activity, then that would be, we would say there's a lot of power in the low frequency, so the slower activity. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's get to what did we find? So the first measure was cognitive performance. Unfortunately, we did not find any significant effect of stimulation on neuropsychological function in any of the measures we looked at. However, practice effects were observed, and that's to be expected. So I've plotted here, this is the performance over time on one of the neuropsychological tests of attention. And this is a selective attention task called the Rough 2 and 7 test, where the participant is looking for a specific number embedded in a visual array of either numbers or letters. And if it's letters, the task is very easy. It's considered a test of automatic attention. On the left is plotted the participant's speed over time, and each time point on the x-axis is, it goes pre-post for each of the interventions. The blue line is the participants who received the stimulation first. So they would have been stimulated during points 1 and 2. The red line is the participants who were stimulated between points 3 and 4. As you can see on the left, that's plotting speed over time. The participants are simply getting faster, but not, there's no difference between the groups. So there's no effect of stimulation there. And on the right is the accuracy. And you can see participants there are getting a little bit better at the task, but then kind of plateauing at the end. And then I'll also call your attention to there's a dotted line for 50, the value of 50, that's the average for the normative average. So if you're scoring 50, that's about average for a normal population. So our participants were a little bit below average, but not clinically so. Only 5 points when they started. So they did approach and then cross over that threshold during the course of the task. So they were not impaired. And this pattern was the same for all of our other measures. Next slide. Okay, so we didn't see any effects on neuropsychological functioning. However, we did see specific significant improvement in symptoms. And that may not be too surprising because we know that RTMS is effective in depression. But I'll go over what domains we observed improvement in. So in our questionnaire measures of executive function, post-concussive symptoms, sleep, and depression, we had significant improvement. The first plot there on the left is executive function. Let me also mention that these plots, I scaled them so that the y-axis is equivalent to 50% of the maximum score on this test. So that gives you an idea of how large the improvement was, or small, but relative to the maximum possible score on the test. So yes, the executive function change is there on the left. There was a 6%, the active condition is the left bar, and the sham condition is the right-hand bar. There was a significant improvement in the active condition for executive function, and that was a 6% improvement. For post-concussive symptoms there on the right, there was a 15% improvement relative to the baseline scores of the participants, which is pretty noteworthy. I found that that's equivalent to about 50% of what was found for a 4-week inpatient rehabilitation program. So this is an intensive program, but it was less time commitment than inpatient, so something to consider. Next slide, please. Okay, so on the left, this is the sleep measure. This also showed a pretty noteworthy improvement of 16%. This was the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, which is a very well considered measure of sleep quality. And then on the right is the depression measure, the PHQ-9, also very, very commonly used. And there was a 9% improvement there. So these 4 questionnaires were the ones that showed a significant effect. I'll also note that all of the other measures that we collected showed the same pattern. Although they did not meet a threshold of statistical significance, the active condition showed nominal improvement relative to the sham condition. I will also note that our blinding measure indicated that the participants were successfully blinded. They were only accurate at chance which condition they were receiving. And this is very interesting, and especially in a crossover trial, because they experienced both stimulation and non-stimulation, and they still could not tell the difference. For TMS, that's it's a big issue, because the TMS, you can feel it. So we went to lengths to blind, and we were glad to see that that was successful, even when the participants had the opportunity to experience the condition where you can actually feel the stimulation. So I'll also note, although I didn't plot it here, that all of these symptoms, we did a 2-week follow-up after the last post-test measure, and the symptoms remained at a level improved relative to their baseline in all measures. Some were at the same level of improvement they were 2 weeks earlier, and a few were actually had continued to improve. So that was interesting. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the outcomes for the resting EEG. Active TMS also did significantly impact the resting EEG. However, this did not, the impact was not as we anticipated. So we thought we were going to see a decrease in frontal EEG slow power at the second measure after the stimulation. So that would be 0.2 and 0.4, depending on which condition you were in. However, what we did see, and I'll explain this plot in just a second, that prefrontal delta power was significantly elevated 1 week after stimulation was completed. So this, and I'll note that the location where we observed the elevation in delta power was not directly underneath the stimulation site. So it was I will say remote to it. It is close. It was prefrontal when we were stimulating lateral frontal area. Prefrontal means the most possible frontal region of the brain. So to explain this plot, the blue line is plotting the EEG power in the delta band for the participants for whom they received the stimulation first. So that little orange arrow is indicating the time period in which they received stimulation. And you can see that after the stimulation ceased at point 2, and then between then and point 3, which was their baseline for the next part of the task, their delta power was significantly elevated. So I saw this, and I was like, well, I wonder if we also observed this in the sham condition, who was stimulated during the period indicated by the coral arrow on the green line between time points 3 and 4. And sure enough, at the time point for follow-up, they also exhibited a significant increase in delta power. Okay, so I'll also note that the increase in delta power was temporary. You can see in the blue line that it's starting to go back to baseline. So our hypothesis was partially confirmed. We did not observe an immediate decrease in delta power, but we definitely saw an alteration in delta signaling. And this was important because this is what we were hypothesizing is primarily altered in resting state EEG and chronic MTBI. So we were able to manipulate that. And this was also interesting because the timing of the measurement, we captured a long-term or like medium-term change in EEG. So it was not immediately after stimulation, which is what is found in the literature. It was a week later. This is a new phenomenon in the condition of TMS. And so it was very interesting because of the novelty and also because it indicates that we induced some medium-term effects in the brain. So it continued to show changes even a week to 2 weeks after the cessation of stimulation. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so you may wonder, is there any functional significance of this change in power? There was actually the size of the delta elevation in the follow-up period relative to the last measure after stimulation was significantly related to the executive functioning self-reported symptoms. So the larger that increase in power, the more symptoms improved. This was significant to a p 0.058, which is marginal, but because the because we only had 16 participants that had complete EEG data, I think it is noteworthy. I see you shaking your head. I can't hear you though. These delta power changes were not related to attention as we hypothesized because we didn't see changes in objective attention measures. However, we haven't examined all of those, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But there is some evidence that there is a functional significance to this delta elevation. There was also, I'm sorry, next slide, please. There was also a trend for this to this relationship with symptom improvement in the depression measure. Okay. Next slide, please. So we are not done analyzing all of our EEG data. It takes some time to work through everything, but we've looked at the low frequency power because that was the main domain where we were hypothesizing changes, but we'll also be looking at other bands, the alpha, beta, and gamma frequencies. Alpha in particular has some correlates with cognitive state in dementia and ADHD, so that's an important one to look at. We're also going to look at the event-related potentials, which are measures derived from EEG during stimulus processing. And we were hypothesizing that there may be some enhanced stimulus processing during a target detection task as a result of the TMS. I have not statistically tested this yet, but it looks like that may be the case just looking at the average ERPs. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, we have a vigilance task where we're measuring resting state EEG during the course of that task, and we have not analyzed that outcome yet. Next slide, please. Okay, so what do we conclude? The RTMS of the DLPFC was not effective for improving learning and attention in MTBI. So unfortunately, that was the case. However, RTMS of the DLPFC was effective for depression symptoms, post-concussive symptoms, subjective sleep dysfunction, and subjective executive function. Also, it appeared to be safe and well tolerated. As George mentioned, headaches may be an issue. One thing from the literature that might be going on with the headache paradox is that different kinds of headaches might respond differently to TMS, like migraine might actually be improved by it, whereas tension headaches could be triggered by it. So there's an indication that some people with headaches should not receive TMS, but the participants who withdrew from our study because of headaches have chronic headaches, so we're not sure that we actually triggered a headache for them. It's unclear. And also this finding of efficacy for symptoms is consistent with the known efficacy of this protocol for depression. So, the next conclusion is that RTMS to the right DLPFC temporarily altered the resting delta circuits over a week-long scale. So I think that's very interesting and worth further study. The longer-term elevation of prefrontal delta power predicted symptom improvement, and therefore this is a clue for the biological mechanism of how RTMS might be effective for executive and depression symptoms in general. So we really don't know why RTMS works. So we looks like somebody lost the internet. Would you like me to stop?
No, I think they just need to kind of get a new invite, perhaps. Chris, you can look at that, but I don't know. Maybe they need TMS.
Yeah,
We just,
I think I do.
we just took care of it. Everything should be good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so I was just saying, we don't really know why RTMS works for depression, but our findings do give an intriguing clue as to perhaps a possible biological mechanism for the improvement in symptoms. And it may involve these delta circuits. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so just a few words on the clinical significance of our findings. So we found statistically significant improvement in PCS, sleep depression, and executive function. As you all know, that's not the same thing as clinical significance. Two of our measures showed improvement that was greater than 10% from baseline, which by some definitions could be considered clinically significant. But I think that it's worth future investigation for sure. However, I'll also say that while there was no improvement in objective cognition, and it would have been great if we had seen that, but subjective functioning may be even more important in a mild TBI setting. And that's because of the fact that in mild injuries, neurobehavioral and psychological symptoms are elevated. That's been shown in, I think, pretty much every sample that's ever been tested. But neuropsychological function is typically normal, whereas it's very easy to observe elevated symptoms of depression or sleep dysfunction. Very rarely do you have a neuropsychological impairment. So that indicates that the symptoms themselves are what's problematic for the mildly injured patients. Another thing is that we're looking at in another study where we're looking at longitudinal changes in MTBI and trying to understand how those might impact long-term outcomes. In the greater literature on what predicts poor outcomes in aging, anxiety and depression are some of the most powerful predictors. So midlife psychological distress is actually a strong indicator of possible issues later on. And lastly, in the same study, the most prominent physiologic brain signal that we're seeing for MTBI several years after the injury is one that is strongly correlated with depression and anxiety symptoms. So these symptoms are strongly tied to outcomes after MTBI. This may have clinical significance because it appears that our TMS may benefit MTBI with subjective cognitive deficits, which are, I'm sure physicians will tell you, are widespread. And this may be even more effective for those who have several psychological and behavioral comorbidities like PCS, depression, and or sleep disorders. And this is speculative, but this may offer a new way to develop interventions using TMS and other rehab programs, because as we saw, we induced kind of a medium-term change in brain function that I'm hypothesizing could create a window of plasticity where symptoms are relieved temporarily and maybe a good time to get in there and do another type of rehabilitation. Next slide, please. Okay, so you might be wondering, why do we think we did not see improvement in neuropsychological function when this has been shown very regularly in depression? My primary guess here is that our participants were not clinically depressed. This protocol has been shown to have neuropsychological benefits in medically refractory depression and in TBI groups who were actually selected for depression, but our results are similar to a very recent study that came out in severe TBI that indicated no neuropsychological benefits. So when you have populations that are not selected for depression that have TBI, it seems like there's not much neuropsychological benefit of RTMS. And this is probably because the depressive symptoms that TBI patients have, if they don't meet the criteria for clinical depression, are not interfering with their cognition nearly at the level that they are for clinical depression. Another possibility is that we can't measure everything, and it's possible that there's another neuropsychological process that was impacted by our RTMS, and these processes are harder to measure. So one example that the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex mediates is self-assessment. And you might see there's a connection there with psychological functioning. But so it's not necessarily how well you do with a performance task, but how good you are at assessing how well you did. So we didn't evaluate things at that level. So, next slide, please. So what do we think this delta elevation is? As I mentioned, this has not been observed in the context of RTMS before. The one place that I did see where you do see a later delta power rebound, or not rebound, but elevation is in regions connected to regions of the brain involved in motor activity after movement. So it seems like it might be related to, as we mentioned before, communication between remote regions of the brain, or even plasticity, so how strongly those regions are connected. So those are hypothetical biological mechanisms or significance of this delta elevation. And the functional interpretation is that this involves temporary changes in processes related to internalizing. So we've talked about the delta signals relating to consciousness and arousal and attention, but they're also generally related to processes that involve losing responsiveness to the outside world. So not just in a negative way, but in a positive way. So when you're concentrating or remembering something that is so you have to use your imagination, you also see these same kind of signatures. They've also been associated with mood increase. So we think we are tapping into these processes. Next slide. Just wanted to mention a couple of things that maybe could be changed in the protocol that might generate neuropsychological benefits. As I mentioned, you could stimulate the frontal cortex and then do a cognitive training program afterwards. because we didn't do any kind of cognitive rehabilitation. We only did TMS. So that's a possibility. And another possibility I mentioned is assess a different range of outcomes that might address these meta-cognitive processes. Next slide. So we are currently writing this up and plan to submit it for publication this spring. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have some more data to analyze. So there will probably be a second paper from all of that to discuss the effects of RTMS for stimulus processing and the vigilance measures. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so very important slide, the acknowledgements. I want to thank everyone who made this possible. Our intervention staff, Cheryl Underwood, Patrick Flynn, worked very hard, did an amazing job. And our advisors and biostatistician are listed there. And I also want to give a special thank you to George, who heroically and most competently stepped in and ran the project. So thank you, George. Thank you, everyone. And I'll stop there for questions.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, George. No. I think you just thanked everybody, but we need to thank the folks that really took a small amount of resources from the CNI fund. And, you know, this is a home run in terms of doing a study well, despite COVID, despite changes in leadership, whatever it is, you know, and really completing the study despite everything and generating, you know, meaningful outcomes. And to me, meaningful outcomes are getting the data, analyzing it fairly, and then putting out translatable information. You don't, you know, good studies don't have to show exactly what you want them to show. That would kind of be illegal and unethical. So it's great, you know, and so, you know, so let's not lose track of that at any level. This is what we want to see from the CNI team, to see folks doing research. And what I hope you're going to do, and I'm planting this seed, is take these feasibility or pilot or whatever we want to call information that shows you can recruit, people can tolerate it, you can analyze, you blah, blah, all those things, and take it to a larger, possibly multi-center study, or look at some of the specific things that both of you have identified could be outcomes, could be meaningful. And so, you know, nothing but praise and love for that. I do want to caution you, and I was shaking my head, but I want to caution you, the data is the data, and there have to be limitations to what you can do. You had a relatively small end because that's what the funding could support, and plus you weren't able to maintain everybody in the project because of the challenges that you've talked about. That's fine. I mean, you did it despite that. I will say, as you know, I sit on a number of national boards, and we just have finished the 2021 clinical practice guidelines for MTBI for the military and the VA. And this was one of the points. And the bottom line is the current literature, including this, says there's no indication for TMS specific to TBI. That doesn't mean for depression, it might not have a role, but it's depression with or without TBI in terms of the current recommendation. So this supports what the other literature says. The other thing I'll say is there's a large multi-center study being done through the military now that Dave Brody is leading, looking at a type of TMS. He's looking at the one where you take the MRI scan and pinpoint exactly where you stimulate to look at a number of outcomes. The last thing I'll say is when you look at a number of outcomes, you need to control the statistics for that. So even if it had been 0.05 instead of 0.058, you know, when we're looking at 20 or 12 or 100 different outcomes, you know, you need to typically control that and ask for more statistical significance. But, you know, that's a detail, and and that's something that can be looked at closer. But, you know, congratulations. This is a home run project completion, and we really appreciate it from the standpoint of the CNI. But the classic line, which I'm going to use sometime, is that an EEG is those squiggles that go up and down. That's, I have to use that. I think my neurology and epilepsy friends would be very impressed with that level of sophistication. Thank you for sharing that, Laura. Yeah, but
Thank you. I guess I need to work on my communication of the the physiological measures, but
Yeah, no,
thank you. I appreciate that. And I agree. I mean, statistical significance is it's just the starting point. No one study answers a question, and we got more questions than we got some answers, but we also got some questions. So I think of that as science.
And we would appreciate actually over the next several months, years, getting certainly a copy of any published manuscripts. And if there's any information about future grants that you were able to leverage off of that, we'd love to put that into our report, because this is a highly fundable VA merit project, no question about, as well as others. And we would love to hear about that. So thank you. Let me pause and open up to other folks on the group for any comments, questions, or follow-up, and then we'll progress. Anybody?
I have a couple of questions. You had 16 subjects. Is that who completed, or is that where you started and then you had attrition?
We had 26 subjects who completed the study. We had 16 that had full EEG at all time points, so I was able to analyze that follow-up period.
And was there any measurement of time post-injury?
I believe we did have that, but I don't recall what the average value was. I'm sorry.
And I believe there was no upper limit. It had to be at least 1 year post-injury. But I think the longest we had post-injury was approximately 20 years.
Okay.
Thank you.
And, the other thing, and I don't know, Dave, maybe you could comment on this with some of the information you heard recently at the meetings you attended. I think for treatment of depression, the protocols, what is it, 4 weeks?
Yeah.
Right. So I know, obviously the longer you do a study like this, the more attrition you're going to have, perhaps the more side effects, head pain, neck pain, because I have had a number of patients who've gone through TMS. And many of the ones that I'm seeing, and again, it's anecdotal, not large, the depressive symptoms that do seem to improve also seem to return within 3 to 6 months after treatment. But I agree with Dave. I think that you did exactly what we expected of this study. And I do remember going back in time, our discussion about funding this study. Because it was sort of a tentative thing, like, is this stuff really going to work? But that's not our job to determine. Our job is to fund the research and see what information we can gain from it. And I'm excited to hear and see what else you're able to gather in your future studies, especially with looking at some of the other EEG waves you're going to look at.
Thank you.
I also want to note, as a hypnotherapist, it is very interesting that we're going back to the time of Anton Mesmer and his magnetism.
Amen. Hey, and Laura, what Dave just said kind of reminded me of something. You said you had 2-week follow-up data that the outcomes appeared durable. And clearly, what you asked them can be done virtually, whether it's Zoom or on a phone call. So, yeah, I mean, actually, the biggest punch you may get in terms of a study is if you could give them a call at 3 months and 6 months, as Dave just indicated. Because 2 weeks, 6 weeks is usually when you start to see decay. That's what we saw in the hyperbaric studies. So that would be a terrific thing to add. And, it would be a very, again, your IRB may not allow you to do that. I don't know. If they're part of the limbic cohort, they certainly can, but something to consider. But great points, Dave. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you both for for this contribution. You are welcome to stay on the call as part of the public, of course. But we look forward to hearing more from you in the future. So thanks both of you. Very appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Wanda, if you could pop up that agenda so Chris doesn't get on me. All right. Okay, so we completed that. Now we're going to go to the RFP update for CNI, and we'll turn back over to Wanda for that.
Okay. So this is 3 parts, and we're going to take them one at a time. First, we're going to start with the update on the release of the research RFP. It was actually released on February 22nd. So it's out there. We're going to have a pre-proposal conference scheduled for next week, 3/18 at 10 o'clock. The due date when the proposals should be in, close of business, April 21st, 2021. So we gave them plenty of time. Just want to let you know, purchasing sent notices of this opportunity to all the DARS BI programs, as well as brain injury research facilities and universities throughout the state of Virginia. Once the RFP closes, the proposals will be sent out to the reviewers that we used last time. When it was canceled, they agreed that they would do the review once the new one was issued. And they were doctors Henry Liu from University of Hawaii, Alan Lewis, SUNY Brooklyn, and Don McGarry, UT Health San Antonio will be the 3 reviewers. So they said they would be happy to do it once it was reissued. Digital copies will also be sent to the board as well as to DARS brain injury staff. Purchasing has informed us that we are looking at mid-May for final evaluations and scoring to get done. Considering the board will meet again early June, that'll probably be perfect for the board to discuss the outside reviews and scores and make a decision on awards. Any questions on that? Oh, all right. So I guess we'll move along to the next topic, which is agreement of release date for the services RFP, excuse me. This is a little more detailed. So first of all, purchasing has informed us that once a decision has been made on release, the final updated version of the RFP should be submitted to them for scheduling for release. If we submit to them by the end of March, 2 weeks from now, they're looking at release date sometime in September. Once that is done, the process for closing until award is approximately 6 months, which puts the award date sometime in the March, April, May timeframe, of course, depending on, you know, when we request it to come back and reviews and everything like that. So when we talk about consideration for the release of the services RFP, you'll see on your screen, it's the funding for, Chris has actually scoped it out for the entire time of the research, the current proposals, the research proposals, as well as services. If we submit, if we award the max for each, and that would be, I think, 1.8 million over 3 years. Is that right, Chris? I think that's how it turns out. Okay, so if we start with what we have now, 2566,590, which is, I'm sorry, 2,566,590. And the total revenue over 21 to 25, you'll see 2,413,760. But then you get to the expenses, which are 4,450,400. It gives us an ending balance, 529,950, which is still good. And you guys talked about how you wanted to start spending some of the money. So this would be a great way to do it.
Helicopter cost again, Dave? What's the cost of a helicopter? Do we have enough? Sorry, go ahead.
I don't think 529,000 is going to do it. So I'm sorry, Dr. Reed. Let me see. And all of this includes current grant payments of for 2021. And then, of course, the 4 research grants at 150 over the years and the 4 services grants, plus also the 3-year CNI cash match for the federal grant starting in 2022, which we will discuss in just a few minutes. Okay, any questions on that? You guys want to discuss what you're thinking?
Thanks, Wanda. You know, I would just recall to the group that we looked at this last time, and obviously we said we were going to revisit it based on post-COVID, peri-COVID, whatever it is. And the good news is that worst case scenario looks like we're still in the very positive area, and we're supporting the mission of DARS by putting the dollars to good work both in services and research. So I still think I'd be very supportive of us moving forward. That's my insights and my thoughts. Other folks?
This is Rennie. I'm very supportive.
Thanks, Ren.
Agreed.
Okay.
I'm also supportive. I just had one kind of just check. We probably talked about this before. So the total revenue projection for 21 to 25 is based on essentially the year before pandemic, or what is our the 2,413,760? That's projecting using what year?
I believe we based it on $45,000 a month.
Okay, so that's already a little bit lower than the actual
yes,
historical.
Yeah,
we
So,
based it sort of low.
so this is still a conservative.
Yep.
Given that
Yes.
the 529 buffer is like over 4 years is about 50 months, and we have about 10,000 additional buffer there every month, essentially.
And of course,
So-
if you award 4 grants over the 3 in each category, in research and in services.
Yeah.
And you're to say, how you want to work that out. You might choose 3 and 1 or 4 or 2 even, but those are the highest figures based on the lowest amount coming in from
Yeah.
DMV.
I think that's a good place to be.
Specifically, we actually used monthly revenue of 45,000, which is significantly below the average, which is running at about 63 right now. So we made sure there was a lot of wiggle room there.
Yeah, and that's probably barely 60% of the pre-COVID average, which was closer to 70 or 80. But we're being as conservative. But good discussion. We need to be fiscally prudent while also advancing the cause. So thank you, Wanda. Wanda, is there more?
Yeah. So, Chris, do they have to vote on moving forward?
Of course we do, and it has to be a roll call vote, doesn't it, Chris?
Chris?
Yes, it does.
Yes, I'm getting this.
Hearing no objections.
Yeah, so what we need then is a motion specifically to move forward with the service-related CNI grants as soon as those can be rolled out, which sounds like it's going to be in the early fall. But so we need a motion that we would move forward with that.
So
correct?
moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
This is Kathy.
Go ahead.
I wonder if I could make a second with a little amendment.
A friendly amendment's always welcome, Kathy.
So we have the 4 community services grants starting FY 2023. Thought I also heard Wanda say that it could be March of 2022. Fiscal year 2023 doesn't start till July. I would love to see us start those earlier than July of 2022. So
Commissioner Hayfield, that's totally possible. We just tried again to give you the most conservative figure.
but if this is a
procurement-
motion, then we're going to be stuck with not starting them till July 1 of 2022.
Well, yeah, I thought my motion had said as early as administration and fiscal could move it ahead, but we can try to put it. I mean, I kind of kept it open-ended, but if you want to,
Okay, that's fine.
yeah.
As long as we're not going with what's on the screen.
I perish that thought. I don't even look at this.
Yeah, and my recollection is that David's the motion that David requested be made was fairly broad and provided a lot of discretion as to when it was started. And
I second it.
I haven't written it down, but
Thank you. It's years of training. Okay, so we're going to have a roll call based vote. Wanda, will you take us through that roll call?
Thank you. Dr. Seafood.
Yes, I approve.
Rennie Delaney.
aye.
David Reed.
Yep.
Kathy Hayfield.
Yes.
Patrick Sandus.
Yes.
I believe that's it. The other 2 are
All right.
not present.
All right, so it is passed in unanimity. Thank you. Wanda, are there other things related to this we need to talk about?
Yes, so the third item to discuss about the services RFP, since everyone has agreed that they want to go forward, we need to look at the scope of work. It's up on your screen, and the priorities that were in the services grant for 2018 are listed, and probably need to discuss if you would like to expand on this information or make changes or leave as is. It's totally for your decision.
If I could bring up two potential areas, again, at some point this list could go on forever, so we probably need to trim it. If everything's a priority, then either everything or nothing is. The two areas that I think are particularly relevant to the disability community in the Commonwealth, as well as overall, I think what should be important is one, a true priority focus on health equity related to individuals with disability in terms of access to services, which is what we're talking about, or access to a range of specialty, non-specialty, clinical, non-clinical. So I think health equity as a priority would be something we should consider. The other thing I think we should consider is a more overarching look at what's called whole health wellness, or just wellness. So things that aren't necessarily specific to a symptom or a specific problem, but are looking at a long range strategy of looking at all aspects of the individual towards a goal on wellness to preserve their brain, their spinal cord, their muscles, their hearts, their lungs. And that's something that certainly in the VA system has been a very strong look towards that. So those would be two areas that I think. So one would be health equities, the other one would be a focus on wellness and lifelong care related to that. Other thoughts?
I absolutely agree on the equity lens for these grants. I think that would be wonderful. I'd also like to see some look at maybe customized employment for people with traumatic brain injuries. It's a very hard population to find employment for. I think it would be great to see an employment focus in the services grants.
Kathy, could I in a friendly way say maybe innovative approaches, whether they be through tele or virtual or something, just because customized it can be both, but I do think the world is moving towards a more telehealth based and virtual based solutions, because there's a ton of literature and work on supported employment, in terms of individual.
I'm not talking supported employment.
I know that, but I'm afraid that customized and supported could. I want to give that lens a little sharpening. So maybe we have a different word. I just don't want to see.
Well, I think that innovations and we might want to play with that a little bit to make it more. And I'm thinking really targeted towards the brain injury population more so than just generic, like you're thinking it could fall into.
Yeah, just because the supported employment folks are going to say that 90% of what they do is brain injury. It used to be spinal cord, but now it's brain and
it's not anymore though. Really, it's autism.
Well, but that's a type of brain insult, and so again, we should just be very clear, because if you look at some of the ones on this list, they're very targeted, and so I think health equities could be generic, but and should be top on the list, but we could also have some suggested areas, as you're saying, and it's traumatic brain injury is what we're speaking of, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what I was speaking of.
Yeah. So again, I think we do need to clarify. Otherwise, we will be getting some where it's acquired brain injury, or there's other phraseology. So that's a great idea.
And when you look at health equity, I think that it's also beneficial to look at, and maybe that's more research too, but looking at the types of services that are provided for people of color, Latinx, in terms of
Socioeconomic.
gender equity,
Yeah.
socioeconomic.
Yeah. No, well, yeah, I mean,
Because I do believe we serve people differently with some implicit biases that
yeah,
that we don't talk about.
Well, and you know, we'd want to see embedded, since it's not research, we want to see embedded in the project, what specific targets do you have to get people into the program, and what are you going to be doing above and beyond saying we're going to keep track of them? But you know, we're going to be going to churches to market, we're going, you know, to advertise, we're going to be making sure that it's accessible for people that can't drive to a site for services, you know. So that's great ideas. Other things, folks, and we can work on this over the next several days, weeks, or whatever time period we have to refine it. But I'd love to see maybe 3 to 5 priorities. We can have sub priorities, but more than 5, it's not a priority.
You can run a truck through it.
Yeah, and there's a pretty big truck driving lane here, and that's on Dave Reed, because I think he was the head of the committee on that day. No, I probably was.
Oh.
No, I think I was.
Yeah. So you know, we can, so one or another, just for the minute, I think we're looking at health equities, maybe innovative or customized programming for vocational support in traumatic brain injury was one. Are there any others that come out? I don't know that COVID specific issues are going to be that relevant for this population in a year and a half. I don't want to eat my words, but you know, that's the sexy thing now for everything. But I think we can be allowing others to work on that unless there's a huge crisis for these long haulers, as they call them. Any other thing?
A clarification question, I guess. So the 2018 RFP prior to release is sort of longer than you'd like to see it be for the 2021.
Well, just my suggestion. I just said, like, I see 8 or 9 priorities, and that really isn't a priority. That's, you know, and they can be sub priorities if you want to be inclusive. But, you know, what are the top 3? At most 5. You know, usually in an RFP, you see 3 to 4 is kind of the most I've seen. You know, that's meaningful. Some of the military ones have 20, and it's challenged. You know, they want every possible submission, and it just makes it hard for the reviewers and for us to make that decision. And, you know, you get extra points for being on as many of their priorities as possible. And, you know, I think we need to drive it. So. Chris, do you need more information from the group or Kathy? Okay, good.
This has been a really good and helpful conversation, and what we'll probably do is draft some language and do some follow-up just for your feedback and wordsmithing. But we're very excited about the priorities that you've identified and appreciate your support.
Sure.
So these priorities that are on here right now, we're going to scratch those completely and start with the list.
Well, I'd say we're going to, you know, be mindful of them, but move them into the proverbial parking lot, you know, and kind of build fresh from what we've talked about. Okay. And then ideally see if we can weave some of this stuff into them, because some of these, you know, may have, like, for example, neurobehavioral may have a health equity spin to it, you know, an element to it. I don't know that. Certainly any of these things, you know, are they addressing, you know, again, I'm pushing for physical activity, community engagement, wellness. And I think that's a huge area for health equity related issues. You know, there are folks from the different specific classes can't access, whether it be health clubs or some athletic activities, just because transport or location or time, or so you can weave it in there. But let's give them some high levels, I think, and I think
we can work on it and get back to you all.
I figured that.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Other comments on this? Anything else you need, Chris or Wanda? Okay. I don't think this needs a vote because we voted on the moving ahead. Okay. All right. If we can go. All right. Thank you. We were back. Okay. This was the next agenda. Go ahead, Chris. I think you were going to discuss this.
Yes. So I sent you just yesterday, and my apologies for the short notice. We are anticipating our application for our next federal funds for traumatic brain injury. Virginia has been a long-term recipient of these funds. And there has been precedent, especially in the recent past, to use CNI grant funds as a match for the federal funds. So we're asking for your consideration, or for more than your consideration, Rennie, I did pay attention to your email. We're asking for your approval to proceed with including in our grant application that we would award, the CNI would award 2 grants over the 5-year period that would complement the work that is going into the federal grant and serve as the cash match. We do anticipate asking for the full $260,000 a year over 5 years that is available. But we wouldn't anticipate that the CNI grants would cover the whole 5 years. We'd like to have the flexibility just to perhaps start with a 3-year grant and then finish with a 2-year grant. The interesting thing in making this request to you is that we still haven't seen the FOA, the funding opportunity announcement from the ACL, but our feedback indicates that it will not be much different from last year, which, unlike previous years, does not dictate any certain population. Under ACL's administration, there is a feeling that the cumulative work that states do has value, it builds momentum, and they don't want to say you have 3 years just to work on working with people in the criminal justice system, and now we want you to switch and working with people with homeless. That really allowing the states to develop their work and to build on it, for which we are very grateful. Kathy, I understand your your sympathies that it has not been released yet. What we're hearing from the ACL staff is that it is ready to be released, but with the new administration in Washington, they are just going back through and looking at all funding opportunity announcements before they get released. So we expect it soon. And this grant would go into effect July 1st.
Chris, I emailed you that I was on a call with ACL when about this grant, and with a number of the other TBI centers across the country, and ACL said yes, it's coming out. They're just finishing the paperwork, and people were eager, and it sounded like it wasn't going to change in terms of their priorities and other elements. So I think this is very timely. I think the obvious question I'm going to ask for Rennie is, as well as Patrick, is did we calculate this cost into that budget?
Yes, we did.
Okay. All right. Good.
Again, trying to cover all bases,
there it is.
be
Okay.
as conservative as possible.
Amen.
So,
good.
Our projections only went out 3 years. We would be asking you for 5 years, but
Yep.
we know we're in good shape.
Okay. Yeah, I will just reinforce what I said to Chris. This is vitally important for our stakeholders across the Commonwealth. This is an amazing way to put in a buck and get out 2, or whatever the dollar amount is, and it's what we're supposed to be doing with our dollars, is leveraging them. So I'm fully in support and would advocate my colleagues to be so. Any comments from other folks? Any concerns, questions? Okay, I would seek a motion for approval for the grant or for the funding as noted for $130,000, which is over a 3-year period. Did I get that right, Chris?
5-year period.
Oh, well, but yeah, since we only, okay, for over a 5-year period, that makes it even sweeter. So I'd ask for that motion for funding for $130,000 over a 5-year period as part of a submission from matching federal dollars.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Are there any friendly amendments? All right, is there any further discussion?
Yes, this is Kathy.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Is that a 10% match or 20% match? What's the match requirement? The percentage?
50%. 50%.
Oh, 50. Oh, 50. Okay, thank you. I was hoping to bring in more. All right.
Are you trying to talk us out of it, Kathy?
I know.
No. I was just trying to, yes, go.
All right, no worries. So you would get 260,000 and you'd put in 130. Is that the 50? Okay, good. To me, that's a 2 to 1. That's a 2 to 1. It's a Vegas term. Yeah, it sounds better. All right. So Wanda, if you would take us through a roll call based vote.
David Reed,
Yay.
David Seafood,
Aye.
Kathy Hayfield,
Yes, ma'am.
Rennie Delaney,
Aye.
Patrick Sanders.
Aye. Yes.
Thank you. It passes unanimously, and thank you for that support and for that discussion.
Thank you all very much.
Yes, thank you. As soon as we get the funding announcement and develop our proposal, we will send that back out to you for your review, so that you will see what we are proposing.
Thanks for the leadership, Chris, and for the advocacy. All right, back to our soon-to-be-ended agenda. All right, CNI grantees update, Wanda.
All right, we're going to run down the list really quick. So active grants, currently research grants are McGuire Research. Dr. Getchell, we just heard from, currently wrapping up his no-cost extension, which will end on the 31st of this month. Final report will be due May 31st, 21. VCU Dixon Research currently working on their no-cost extension, which is set to expire 6/30 this year, 21. Final report will be due August 30th, 2021. VCU, this is starting the services grant, Trost, that's for the SCI outreach. Currently in third and final year, ending 7/31/21. On a little side note, back in July 2020, when the pandemic was wreaking havoc on everyone, the board gave each grantee the opportunity to use a 3-month no-cost extension at the end of their contracts if needed. I have heard from several grantees about taking advantage of these 3 months. I've informed them that anytime needed after the 3-month extension would need to be formally requested through a justification document and submitted to the board for approval. I asked them to prepare their justification for extended no-cost extension and submit to me before advisory board meetings scheduled for either June or September. Okay, next we'll go on to Dr. Grow. Christine Grow, Project Achieve Support Technology, currently in third and final year, ending date 7/31/21. Recently received an email from Christine. She says, we have recently accepted some new participants and are optimistic that we will continue to get new referrals. So that was from when the board decided to open up her project to the public, not just veterans, for her support technology for college students. Okay, next we go on to Armstrong Enhancing Parenting Skills. That's a VCU project as well, currently in third and final year, ending date 7/31/21. Next is Brain Injury Connections, the Shenandoah Valley, their pediatric case management, currently in its third and final year, ending 7/31/21. United Spinal with their peer mentoring, currently in their third and final year, but theirs does not end. It started later, so it doesn't end until January 2022. So they have almost a year left. Next, we go on to the cash match headed up by Jenny Morowitz now. Dr. Kreutzer has retired. They're currently in their third and final year, and that will be ending 9/30/21. So that's coming up as well. CBIS, who Community Brain Injury Services, Jason Young, his project has ended and his final report was submitted, and I sent that to each board member. He also did a podcast recently for Brain Injury Awareness Month regarding the CNI Clubhouse project. the podcast. Each of you should have received that information as well. I received a recent email from Jason stating we are going to have a public policy sheet on our research grant. It is currently at the graphic department at UMass, getting ready for a final review. I'll send that to you when it's ready to roll, probably in the next few weeks. So that's good news. So both the final report and the podcast will be added to the CNI website once the next section has been updated. As you already know, we're going through the website section by section with our updates. The next section we're working on is the grantee page. Adding a statement at the top of the website in the announcement box to click the link for latest happenings of the CNI grantees. This will take you to the individualized pages belonging to each grantee and all the pertinent information regarding their projects and any special things that come up because of their projects. The Meet the Board section is just about complete. Chris, can you bring up to share with the group? And there it is. So you guys look fantastic. And you'll notice it's a picture with each one. Dr. Reed, I used the picture you wanted me to use.
Oh, David, next level.
Next level. And if you click on read bio, there it is.
Oh,
Everybody has their
very impressive.
bio.
The whole
And,
thing. Is wow.
Thank you. Just wanted to bring us up to date with our website, and should be pretty sweet once it's all said and done.
Really
So
impressive.
and there's-
Wait, Defuse is going to take forever to read.
Bless you.
I know it was really long now.
I mean, it's like an autobiography.
I
going on
appreciate the
there.
photoshopping too. Thank you.
Based on David's photo, I may have to resubmit something else.
I think you should. Yeah, I like them all though. Really, you guys look great. Everybody looks great.
Everybody looks at the bottom. There's a link that you can actually scroll down to if you want more information on how to apply to the board. Chris, does it go down any further? The advisory board section, and it should be, there it is. Interested in joining the CNI board, you click that and it takes you to the governor's website where you can, it'll show you a list of all the boards. You select CNI and then it'll show you the people that are rotating off at the time, and then you can click submit your application.
Hey, Wanda and Kathy, as a follow-up to what we were talking about before in terms of equity, can we just make sure that promo and all that gets to the relevant, it gets out in a way that's relevant so we can expand some of the diversity of our board, just in terms of not everybody goes on the internet. Oh, Kathy, you're on mute. Oh.
That. I was just looking at that saying, you guys are all nice, but you're all white guys.
Actually, I have to take exception to that. I'm mixed race.
Well, good.
Thank you for highlighting that. I still, even with that, I still think we need to, it's not so much that the board it may not be representative or is, but we have to make sure that we're marketing and advertising it across different ways, because not everybody is jumping on this website other than me to look at my picture, but the rest of it might not be. So
But we do need diversity of
Yeah.
interest and opinions and.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
I think the governor's office is aware of that. They recently, within the last year, I've heard from the diversity board guy at the governor's office, and so I think they're also doing things to promote diversity on the governor's boards, so that that information should be getting out in some way through the governor as well.
Well, can I ask, relevant to what Rennie just brought up, are there different categories, if I may say, that we all belong to? Are those somehow listed for the governor's sake? Does he know those? If not, we just have to make sure that's apparent, because it may be difficult to know. I don't know that. I don't recall checking off specific boxes or not.
Yeah.
Maybe I did.
It's more focused on the background, the experience, people with disabilities and.
Yeah. Well, but I think we should just make sure we call to light. We want all diversity, in all areas. So.
Right.
I want to lead the charge, but that's great. And I'm confident in you, Kathy, to be doing that. So thank you.
And you might also note that I'm a disabled war veteran.
Who said that?
Rennie.
Randy, we do need to know, let's make sure we're updating whatever, the pieces to reflect that. Rennie, thank you for your service, my friend.
Well, maybe the bios could, I mean, we're not going to talk about.
I think it's in Rennie's bio.
Okay.
Okay, but again, congratulations. It's a sharp looking page.
It is, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, it's got it. Yeah, he's there.
That's all I have.
Thank you. Now, using my TMS stimulated brain, with the squigglies and all, I believe we're at the end of our agenda. And we've obviously covered general and public comments. Let's just see if there's any comments from other folks on the call from the board members that they want to add. Hearing none, I want to thank Wanda and Chris for taking us smoothly through yet another meeting, and my fellow board members for your great work, and everyone. And enjoy the spring. Stay safe. And we'll see you at the next meeting. I'm sure we'll communicate electronically as well. So all the best, everyone.
June 11th.
Good meeting.
June 11th. There it is. All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care, folks. Thank you.
Thank you.